Chapter 12. Victoria. Joan felt her heart beating with sudden excitement. It was good to be home. She felt, just for a moment, as though she had never been away. England, her own country. Nice English porters, a not-so-nice but very English foggy day. Not romantic, not beautiful, just dear old Victoria Station, just the same as ever, looking just the same, smelling just the same. Oh, thought Joan, I'm glad to be back. Such a long, weary journey across Turkey and Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and Italy and France. Customs officers and passport examinations, all the different uniforms, all the different languages. She was tired. Yes, definitely tired of foreigners. Even that extraordinary Russian woman who had travelled with her from Aleppo to Istanbul had got rather tiresome in the end. She had been interesting, indeed quite exciting to begin with, simply because she was so different. But by the time they had been running down beside the Sea of Marmora to Heather Pacha, Joan had been definitely looking forward to their parting. For one thing, it was embarrassing to remember how freely she, Joan, had talked about her own private affairs to a complete stranger. And for another, well, it was difficult to put it into words, but something about her had made Joan feel definitely provincial. Not a very pleasant feeling. It had been no good to say to herself that she hoped she, Joan, was as good as anybody. She didn't really think so. She felt uneasily conscious that Sasha, for all her friendliness, was an aristocrat, while she herself was middle class, the unimportant wife of a country solicitor. Very stupid, of course, to feel like that. But anyway, all that was over now. She was home again, back on a native soil. There was no one to meet her, for she had sent no further wire to Rodney to tell him when she was arriving. She had had a strong feeling that she wanted to meet Rodney in their own house. She wanted to be able to start straight away on a confession without pause or delay. It would be easier, so she thought. You couldn't very well ask a surprised husband for forgiveness on the platform at Victoria. Certainly not on the arrival platform, with its hurrying mob of people and the customs shed at the end. No, she would spend the night quietly at the Grosvenor and go down to Crayminster tomorrow. Should she wondered, try and see Avril first? She could ring Avril up from the hotel. Yes, she decided she might do that. She had only hand luggage with her, and as it had already been examined at Dover, she was able to go with the porter straight to the hotel. She had a bath and dressed and then rang up Avril. Fortunately, Avril was at home. Mother, I'd no idea you were back. I arrived this afternoon. Is father up in London? No, I didn't tell him when I was arriving. He might have come up to meet me, and that would be a pity if he's busy. Tiring for him. She thought that she heard a faint note of surprise in Avril's voice as she said, Yes, I think you are right. He's been very busy lately. Have you seen much of him? No. He was up in London for the day about 3 weeks ago, and we had lunch together. What about this evening, Mother? Would you like to come out and have dinner somewhere? I'd rather you came here, darling, if you don't mind. I'm a little tired with travelling. I expect you must be. All right, I'll come around. Won't Edward come with you? He's got a business dinner tonight. Joan put down the receiver. Her heart was beating a little faster than usual. She thought, Avril, my Avril. How cool and liquid Avril's voice was. Calm, detached, impersonal. Half an hour later, they telephoned up that Mrs. Harrison Wilmot was there, and Joan went down. Mother and daughter greeted each other with English reserve. Avril looked well, Joan thought. She was not quite so thin. Joan felt a faint thrill of pride as she went with her daughter into the dining room. Avril was really very lovely, so delicate and distinguished looking. They sat down at a table, and Joan got a momentary shock as she met her daughter's eyes. They were so cool and uninterested. Avril, like Victoria Station, had not changed. It's I who have changed, thought Joan, but Avril doesn't know that. Avril asked about Barbara and about Baghdad. Joan recounted various incidents of her journey home. Somehow or other, their talk was rather difficult. It did not seem to flow. Avril's inquiries after Barbara were almost perfunctory. It really seemed as though she had an inkling that more pertinent questions might be indiscreet. But Avril couldn't know anything of the truth. It was just her usual delicate, incurious attitude. The truth, Joan thought suddenly. How do I know it is the truth? Mightn't it just possibly be all imagination on her part? After all, there was no concrete evidence. She rejected the idea, but the mere passing of it through her head had given her a shock. Supposing she was one of those people who imagine things. Avril was saying in her cool voice, Edward has got it into his head that there's bound to be war with Germany one day. Joan roused herself. That's what a woman on the train said. She seemed quite certain about it. She was rather an important person, and she really seemed to know what she was talking about. I can't believe it. Hitler would never dare to go to war. Avril said thoughtfully, Oh, I don't know. Nobody wants war, darling. Well, people sometimes get what they don't want. Joan said decidedly, I think all this talk of it is very dangerous. It puts ideas into people's heads. Avril smiled. They continued to talk in rather a desultory fashion. After dinner, Joan yawned, and Avril said she wouldn't stay and keep her up. She must be tired. Joan said yes, she was rather tired. On the following day, Joan did a little shopping in the morning and caught the 2:30 train to Crayminster. That would get her there just after 4 o'clock. She would be waiting for Rodney when he came home at tea time from the office. She looked out of the carriage window with appreciation. Nothing much in the way of scenery to see this time of year. Bare trees, a faint, misty rain falling. But how natural, how homelike. Baghdad, with its crowded bazaars, its brilliant blue-domed and golden mosques, was far away, unreal. It might never have happened. That long, fantastic journey, that plains of Anatolia, the snows and mountain scenery of the Taurus, the high, bare plains, the long descent through mountain gorges to the Bosphorus, Stamboul with its minarets, the funny ox wagons of the Balkans, Italy with the blue Adriatic Sea glistening as they left Trieste, Switzerland and the Alps in the darkening light. A panorama of different sights and scenes, and all ending in this, the journey home through the quiet winter countryside. I might never have been away, thought Joan. I might never have been away. She felt confused, unable to coordinate her thoughts clearly. Seeing Avril last night had upset her. Avril's cool eyes looking at her, calm, incurious. Avril, she thought, hadn't seen any difference in her. Well, after all, why should Avril see a difference? It wasn't her physical appearance that had changed. She said very softly to herself, Rodney. The glow came back. the sorrow, the yearning for love and forgiveness. She thought, it's all true. I am beginning a new life. She took a taxi up from the station. Agnes opened the door and displayed a flattering surprise and pleasure. The master, Agnes said, would be pleased. Joan went up to her bedroom, took off her hat and came down again. The room looked a little bare, but that was because it had no flowers in it. I must cut some laurel tomorrow, she thought, and get some carnations from the shop at the corner. She walked about the room, feeling nervous and excited. Should she tell Rodney what she had guessed about Barbara? Supposing that, after all, of course it wasn't true. She had imagined the whole thing. Imagined it all because of what that stupid woman, Blanche Donovan had said. Really, Blanche had looked too terrible, so old and coarse. Joan put a hand to her head. She felt as though within her brain was a kaleidoscope. She had had a kaleidoscope as a child and loved it, had held her breath as all the coloured pieces whirled and revolved before settling down into a pattern. What had been the matter with her? That horrible rest-house place, and that very odd experience she had had in the desert. She had imagined all sorts of unpleasant things, that the children didn't like her, that Rodney had loved Leslie Shurston. Of course he hadn't. What an idea. Poor Leslie. And she had even been regretful because she had persuaded Rodney out of that extraordinary fancy of his to take up farming. Really, she had been very sensible and far-seeing. Oh dear, why was she so confused? All those things she had been thinking and believing, such unpleasant things, were they actually true? Or weren't they? She didn't want them to be true. She'd got to decide. She'd got to decide. What had she got to decide? The sun, thought Joan. The sun was very hot. The sun does give you hallucinations. Running in the desert, falling on her hands and knees, praying. Was that real? Or was this? Madness, absolute madness, the things she had been believing. How comfortable, how pleasant to come home to England and feel you had never been away, that everything was just the same as you had always thought it was. And, of course, everything was just the same. A kaleidoscope, whirling, whirling, settling presently into one pattern or the other. Rodney, forgive me. I didn't know. Rodney, here I am. I've come home. Which pattern? Which? She'd got to choose. She heard the sound of the front door opening, a sound she knew so well, so very well. Rodney was coming. Which pattern? Which pattern? Quick! The door opened. Rodney came in. He stopped, surprised. Joan came quickly forward. She didn't look at once at his face. Give him a moment, she thought. Give him a moment. Then she said, gaily, Here I am, Rodney. I've come home. Epilogue. Rodney Scudamore sat in the small, low-backed chair while his wife poured out tea and clanked the teaspoons and chattered brightly about how nice it was to be home again and how delightful it was to find everything exactly the same, and that Rodney wouldn't believe how wonderful it was to be back in England again and back in Crayminster and back in her own home. On the window-pane a big blue bottle, deceived by the unusual warmth of the early November day, buzzed importantly up and down the glass. Buzz, buzz, buzz. went the blue bottle. Tinkle, 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 went Joan Scudamore's voice. Rodney sat smiling and nodding his head. Noises, he thought. Noises, meaning everything to some people and nothing at all to others. He had been mistaken, he decided, in thinking that there was something wrong with Joan when she first arrived. There was nothing wrong with Joan. She was just the same as usual. Everything was just the same as usual. Presently, Joan went upstairs to see to her unpacking, and Rodney went across the hall to his study, where he had brought some work home from the office. But first, he unlocked the small top right-hand drawer of his desk and took out Barbara's letter. It had come by airmail and had been sent off a few days before Joan's departure from Baghdad. It was a long, closely written letter, and he knew it now almost by heart. Nevertheless, he read it through again, dwelling a little on the last page. So now I have told you everything, darling Dads. I dare say you guessed most of it already. You needn't worry about me. I do realize just what a criminal, wicked little fool I have been. Remember, Mother knows nothing. It wasn't too easy keeping it all from her, but Dr. McQueen played up like a trump, and William was wonderful. I really don't know what I should have done without him. He was always there, ready to fund Mother off if things got difficult. I felt pretty desperate when she wired she was coming out. I knew you must have tried to stop her, darling, and that she just wouldn't be stopped. And I suppose it was really rather sweet of her, in a way. Only, of course, she had to rearrange our whole lives for us, and it was simply maddening, and I felt too weak to struggle much. I'm only just beginning to feel that Mopsy is my own again. She is sweet. I wish you could see her. Did you like us when we were babies, or only later? Darling Dads, I'm so glad I had you for a father. Don't worry about me. I'm all right now. Your loving Babs. Rodney hesitated a moment, holding the letter. He would have liked to have kept it. It meant a great deal to him, that written declaration of his daughter's faith and trust in him. But in the exercise of his profession he had seen, only too often, the dangers of kept letters. If he were to die suddenly, Joan would go through his papers and come across it, and it would cause her needless pain. No need for her to be hurt and dismayed. Let her remain happy and secure in that bright, confident world that she had made for herself. He went across the room and dropped Barbara's letter into the fire. Yes, he thought, she would be all right now. They would all be all right. It was for Barbara he had feared most, with her unbalanced, deeply emotional temperament. Well, the crisis had come, and she had escaped, not unscathed, but alive. And already she was realizing that Mopsy and Bill were truly her world. A good fellow, Bill Ray. Rodney hoped that he hadn't suffered too much. Yes, Barbara would be all right. And Tony was all right in his orange groves in Rhodesia. A long way away, but all right. And that young wife of his sounded the right kind of girl. Nothing had ever hurt Tony much. Perhaps it never would. He had that sunny type of mind. And Avril was all right too. As always, when he thought of Avril, it was pride he felt, not pity. Avril with a dry legal mind and a passion for understatement. Avril with a cool, sarcastic tongue, so rock-like, so staunch, so strangely unlike the name they had given her. He had fought Avril, fought her and vanquished her with the only weapons her disdainful mind would recognize, weapons that he himself had found it distasteful to use. Cold reasons, logical reasons, pitiless reasons. She had accepted those. But had she forgiven him? He thought not. But it didn't matter. If he had destroyed her love for him, he had retained and enhanced her respect, and in that end, he thought, to a mind like hers and to a flawless rectitude, it is respect that counts. On the eve of a wedding day, speaking to his best-loved child across the great gulf that now separated them, he had said, "I hope you will be happy." And she had answered quietly, "I shall try to be happy." That was Avril. No heroics, no dwelling on the past, no self-pity. A disciplined acceptance of life and the ability to live it without help from others. He thought, "They're out of my hands now, the three of them." Rodney pushed back the papers on his desk and came over to sit in the chair on the right of the fireplace. He took with him the Massingham lease and, sighing, slightly started to read it over. "The landlord lets and the tenant takes all that farmhouse buildings, lands and hereditaments situated." He read on and turned the page. "Not to take more than 2 white straw crops of corn from any part of the arable lands without a summer fallow, a crop of turnips and rape sown on land well cleaned and manured and eaten on such land with sheep to be considered equivalent to a fallow, and—" His hand relaxed, and his eyes wandered to the empty chair opposite. That was where Leslie had sat when he argued with her about the children and the undesirability of their coming in contact with Shurston. She ought, he had said, to consider the children. She had considered them, she said, and after all, he was their father. A father who had been in prison, he said, and ex-jailbird, public opinion, ostracism, cutting them off from their normal social existence, penalizing them unfairly. She ought, he said, to think of all that. Children, he said, should not have their youth clouded. They should start fair. And she had said, "That's just it. He is their father. It isn't so much that they belong to him, that he belongs to them. I can wish, of course, that they'd had a different kind of father, but it isn't so." And she had said, "What kind of a start in life would it be? To begin by running away from what's there?" Well, he saw her idea, of course, but it didn't agree with his ideas. He'd always wanted to give his children the best of things. Indeed, that was what he and Joan had done. The best schools, the sunniest rooms in the house. They'd practiced small economies themselves to make that possible. But in their case, there had never been any moral problem. There had been no disgrace, no dark shadow, no failure, despair and anguish. No question of that kind where it would have been necessary to say, "Shall we shield them or let them share?" And it was Leslie's ideas, he saw, that they should share. She, although she loved them, would not shrink from placing a portion of a burden on those small, untrained backs. Not selfishly, not to ease her own load, but because she did not want to deny them even the smallest, most unendurable part of reality. Well, he thought that she was wrong, but he admitted, as he had always admitted, her courage. It went beyond courage for herself. She had courage for those she loved. He remembered Joan saying that autumn day as he went to the office, "Courage? Oh, yes, but courage isn't everything." And he had said, "Isn't it?" Leslie sitting there in his chair, with a left eyebrow going slightly up and a right eyebrow down, and with the little twist at the right-hand corner of her mouth, and a head against the faded blue cushion that made her hair look, somehow, green. He remembered his voice, slightly surprised, saying, "Your hair's not brown. It's green." It was the only personal thing he'd ever said to her. He'd never thought very much what she looked like. Tired, he knew, and ill, and yet, withal, strong. Yes, physically strong. He had thought once, incongruously, she could sling a sack of potatoes over her shoulder just like a man. Not a very romantic thought, and there wasn't really anything very romantic that he could remember about her. The right shoulder higher than the left eyebrow going up, and the right down. The little twist at the corner of her mouth when she smiled, the brown hair that looked green against a faded blue cushion. Not much, he thought, for love to feed on. And what was love? In heaven's name, what was love? The peace and content that he'd felt to see her sitting there, in his chair, her head green against the blue cushion. The way she had said suddenly, "You know, I've been thinking about Copernicus." Copernicus? Why in heaven's name Copernicus? A monk with an idea, with a vision of a differently shaped world, and who was cunning and adroit enough to compromise with the powers of the world and to write his fate in such a form as would pass muster. Why should Leslie, with a husband in prison and a living to earn and a children to worry about, sit there running a hand through her hair and say, "I've been thinking about Copernicus"? Yet, because of that, for always, at the mention of Copernicus, his own heart would miss a beat, and up there on the wall he had hung an old engraving of the monk to say to him, "Leslie." He thought, "I should at least have told her that I loved her. I might have said so, once." But had there been any need? That day on Asheldown, sitting there in the October sunlight, he and she together and apart, the agony and the desperate longing. 4 feet of space between them, 4 feet because there couldn't safely be less. She had understood that. She must have understood that. He thought confusedly, that space between us, like an electric field, charged with longing. They had not looked at each other. He had looked down over the ploughland and the farm, with the distant faint sound of the tractor and the pale purple of the upturned earth, and Leslie had looked beyond the farmland to the woods. Like two people gazing at a promised land to which they could not enter in. He thought, "I should have told her that I loved her then." But neither of them had said anything, except just that once when Leslie had murmured, "And thy eternal summer shall not fade." Just that, one hackneyed line of quotation, and he didn't even know what she had meant by it. Or perhaps he did. Yes, perhaps he did. The chair cushion had faded, and Leslie's face. He couldn't remember her face clearly, only that queer twist of the mouth. And yet, for the last 6 weeks she had sat there every day and talked to him. Just fantasy, of course. He had invented a pseudo-Leslie and put her there in the chair and put words into her mouth. He had made her say what he wanted her to say, and she had been obedient, but her mouth had curved upwards at the side as though she had laughed at what he was doing to her. It had been, he thought, a very happy 6 weeks. He'd been able to see Watkins and Mills, and there had been that jolly evening with Hargrave Taylor. Just a few friends, and not too many of them. That pleasant tramp across the hills on Sunday, The servants had given him very good meals, and he'd eaten them as slowly as he had liked, with a book propped up against the soda-water siphon. Some work to finish sometimes after dinner, and then a pipe, and finally, just in case he might feel lonely, false Leslie arranged in a chair to keep him company. False Leslie, yes. But hadn't there been, somewhere, not very far away, real Leslie? And thy eternal summer shall not fade. He looked down again at the lease. And shall in all respects cultivate the said form in due and regular course of good husbandry. He thought wonderingly, I'm really quite a good lawyer. And then, without wonder, and without much interest, I'm successful. Farming, he thought, was a difficult, heartbreaking business. My God, though, he thought, I'm tired. He hadn't felt so tired for a long time. The door opened and Joan came in. Oh, Rodney, you can't read that without the light on. She rustled across behind him and turned the light on. He smiled and thanked her. You're so stupid, darling, to sit here ruining your eyes when all you've got to do is just to turn a switch. She added affectionately as she sat down, I don't know what you'd do without me. Get into all sorts of bad habits. His smile was teasing, kindly. Do you remember, Joan went on, when you suddenly got an idea you wanted to turn down Uncle Henry's offer and take up farming instead? Yes, I remember. Aren't you glad now I wouldn't let you? He looked at her, admiring her eager competence, the youthful poise of her neck, her smooth, pretty, unlined face, cheerful, confident, affectionate. He thought, Joan's been a very good wife to me. He said quietly, Yes, I'm glad. Joan said, We all get impractical ideas sometimes. Even you? He said it teasingly, but was surprised to see her frown. An expression passed over her face like a ripple across smooth water. One gets nervy sometimes, morbid. He was still more surprised. He could not imagine Joan nervy or morbid. Changing the subject, he said, You know, I quite envy you your journey out east. Yes, it was interesting, but I shouldn't like to have to live in a place like Baghdad. Rodney said thoughtfully, I'd like to know what the desert is like. It must be rather wonderful. Emptiness and a clear, strong light. It's the idea of the light that fascinates me, to see clearly. Joan interrupted him. She said vehemently, It's hateful, hateful, just arid nothingness. She looked round the room with a sharp, nervous glance. Rather, he thought, like an animal that wants to escape. Her brow cleared. She said, That cushion's dreadfully old and faded. I must get a new one for that chair. He made a sharp, instinctive gesture, then checked himself. After all, why not? Her cushion was faded. Leslie Adeline Shurston was in the churchyard under a marble slab. The firm of Alderman, Scudamore and Whitney was forging ahead. Farmer Hoddesdon was trying to raise another mortgage. Joan was walking round the room, testing a ledge for dust, replacing a book in the bookshelf, moving the ornaments on the mantelpiece. It was true that in the last 6 weeks the room had acquired an untidy, shabby appearance. Rodney murmured to himself softly, The holidays are over. What? She whirled round on him. What did you say? He blinked at her disarmingly. "Did I say something?" "I thought you said the holidays are over." "You must have dropped off and been dreaming about the children going back to school." "Yes," said Rodney. "I must have been dreaming." She stood, looking at him doubtfully. Then she straightened a picture on the wall. "What's this? It's new, isn't it?" "Yes, I picked it up at Hartley's sale." "Oh." Joan eyed it doubtfully. "Copernicus. Is it valuable?" "I've no idea," said Rodney. He repeated thoughtfully, "I've no idea at all. What was valuable? What was not? Was there such a thing as remembrance? You know, I've been thinking about Copernicus. Leslie with a shifty jailbird of a husband, drunkenness, poverty, illness, death. Poor Mrs. Shurston, such a sad life. But he thought Leslie wasn't sad. She walked through disillusionment and poverty and illness like a man walks through bogs and over plough and across rivers, cheerfully and impatiently to get to wherever it is he is going. He looked thoughtfully at his wife out of tired but kindly eyes, so bright and efficient and busy, so pleased and successful. He thought, she doesn't look a day over 28. And suddenly a vast upwelling rush of pity swept over him. He said with intense feeling, "Poor little Joan." She stared at him. She said, "Why, poor? And I'm not little." He said in his old teasing voice, "Here am I, little Joan. If nobody's with me, I'm all alone." She came to him with a sudden rush, almost breathing. She said, "I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I've got you." "Yes," said Rodney. "You've got me." But he knew, as he said it, that it wasn't true. He thought, "You are alone, and you always will be. But please God, you'll never know it."